The forest of Alarwin had a reputation. Not because it was cursed, not because monsters lurked beneath its ancient roots, and not because travelers vanished within it. No, it was infamous because people got lost in the stupidest ways imaginable. Merchants would swear the roads moved when they weren't looking. Hunters blamed mischievous spirits after walking in circles for hours. One particularly embarrassed knight claimed a squirrel had strategically misdirected him for nearly 2 days. That knight had later been discovered asleep in a berry bush. Lucas Ravens was beginning to suspect the stories were true. I swear that Rock was on my left earlier. The tall human stood in the middle of the forest trail with his hands on his hips, staring accusingly at a moss-covered stone like it had personally insulted him. His dark brown cloak hung loosely over travel-worn leather armor, and his black hair had become increasingly disheveled over the past several hours. He had been heading toward the trade city of Valemore. At least, he thought he had been. Now he was reasonably certain he'd somehow walked in a giant circle. Again, a soft breeze rustled the golden leaves overhead, while birds chirped with the kind of peaceful confidence that only creatures with functioning navigational instincts possessed. Lucas sighed dramatically. Well, he muttered to himself, this is how legends begin. A pause, or how idiots die in the woods. The forest offered no reassurance. With a groan, he adjusted the pack over his shoulder and continued forward. Truthfully, Lucas wasn't entirely sure what he was doing with his life anymore. At 27, he'd worked as a caravan guard, a dockhand, a scribe assistant, and very briefly, a tavern musician before being politely asked to never touch a lute again. Apparently, enthusiasm was not a substitute for musical talent. Still, he had an easy smile and a good heart, which carried a man surprisingly far in life. Unfortunately, neither helped with directions. By late afternoon, the sunlight had begun to dim beneath the towering canopy. Lucas rubbed his eyes and stopped beside a stream to refill his water skin. That was when he heard voices. Female voices. One annoyed, one laughing, and one sounding dangerously close to committing murder. Lucas froze. No, I'm telling you the map is upside down. It is not upside down. You've been holding it backward for an hour. That explains so much, actually. Lucas blinked. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped through the underbrush and immediately regretted it. The branch beneath his boot snapped loudly. 3 heads whipped toward him. Lucas straightened so fast, he nearly threw his back out. Oh, hello. The women staring at him were impressive. The first was unmistakably an elf, tall and elegant, with silver blonde hair cascading over emerald traveling leathers. Her golden eyes narrowed sharply at him with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for criminals and particularly ugly shoes. The second woman was shorter and broader, clearly a dwarf. Auburn hair was tied into a thick braid decorated with tiny metal rings, and her muscular arms rested confidently across her chest. She looked like she could arm wrestle bears recreationally. The third nearly made Lucas forget how breathing worked. She had curved black horns emerging from dark crimson hair and striking violet eyes that gleamed with amusement. A Demonkin, or something close to it. Her pointed tail flicked lazily behind her as she looked him over. The horned woman smiled first. Well, she said smoothly, he's cute. Lucas immediately choked on air. The elf sighed. You flirt with literally everyone. And yet somehow it keeps working. The dwarf snorted loudly. Lucas, meanwhile, was still attempting to remember how language functioned. The horned woman stepped forward with casual confidence. You were eavesdropping. I was getting lost professionally. What? I heard voices while wandering aimlessly through the forest. The dwarf burst out laughing instantly. Even the elf's expression cracked slightly. The horned woman grinned wider. That may be the worst answer I've ever heard. It's also the honest one. That somehow makes it worse. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. In my defense, this forest appears to be enchanted by drunk cartographers. The dwarf laughed harder. Oh, I like this idiot already. The elf pinched the bridge of her nose. Wonderful, another one. Lucas pointed politely. See, that hurts a little because I don't even know your name yet. The horned woman covered a laugh with her hand. The elf stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking. Lyra. She gestured toward the dwarf. Broma. Then toward the horned woman. And that menace is Seraphine. Seraphine placed a hand dramatically over her chest. I prefer delightful chaos spirit. You set our breakfast on fire. It was cold. Lucas couldn't help it. He laughed, and something about that simple sound made the atmosphere shift. The tension eased. The forest suddenly felt warmer, more alive. Broma stepped forward first and offered Lucas a firm handshake that nearly crushed his fingers. You traveling alone, lad? Yes. Dangerous. Apparently so. Lyra studied him carefully. You don't look like a mercenary. I'm not. A knight. No. A mage. Lucas hesitated. I once accidentally exploded soup. Seraphine's eyes widened with delight. Oh, he's definitely staying with us for a while. Lucas blinked. I am. Lyra opened her mouth. Broma interrupted first. You know the roads. Mostly. Can fight. Moderately. Can cook. Lucas straightened proudly. Yes. The three women paused. Seraphine looked impressed. Lyra looked suspicious. Broma looked emotional. A traveling man who can cook, the dwarf whispered, by the ancestors. Lucas laughed nervously. I make a decent stew. Broma grabbed his shoulders. You're hired. For what? No idea yet. Seraphine was openly cackling now. Even Lyra looked dangerously close to smiling again. And just like that, Lucas Raven somehow found himself walking through the forests of Alarwin, beside three beautiful women he had met less than 15 minutes earlier, which, in hindsight, should probably have concerned him more, especially considering he still had absolutely no idea where he was going. The first thing Lucas learned about traveling with three women from different fantasy races was that none of them agreed on anything. Too much salt. It needs more salt. If either of you touch the pot again, I will stab someone. Lucas stood over the campfire stirring a pot of venison stew while trying very hard not to laugh. Night had settled over the forest, painting the woods in silver moonlight and dancing shadows. Their camp sat beside a small stream beneath ancient trees whose branches twisted like sleeping giants overhead. The stew simmered gently. The argument did not. Broma pointed an accusatory finger toward Lyra. Elves don't season food properly. We prefer tasting the actual ingredients. That's just leaf-eating arrogance. It's called refinement. It's called sadness. Seraphine sat on a fallen log nearby watching the exchange with open delight, while Lucas fought a losing battle against a smile. You all travel together often? He asked carefully. No, Lyra answered immediately. Yes, Broma answered at the same time. Seraphine grinned wickedly. They've been pretending not to like each other for almost a year now. We tolerate each other, Lyra corrected. Broma scoffed. You cried when I got poisoned. That was tactical concern. You held my hand. You were dying. You stroked my hair. That was. You called me brave. Lyra's face immediately turned red. Lucas wisely looked back into the stew before he got caught witnessing something he probably shouldn't. Seraphine leaned toward him conspiratorially. They're adorable. I can still hear you, Lyra muttered. Yes, that's what makes it fun. Lucas chuckled softly. Honestly, the whole situation felt surreal. Only that morning, he'd been wandering through the woods alone, mildly convinced he might die from either starvation or poor navigation choices. Now he was cooking dinner beside an elf, a dwarf, and a dangerously charming horned woman who kept staring at him like she was planning something illegal. Life was strange sometimes. You smile a lot, Seraphine suddenly observed. Lucas glanced up from the stew. Is that unusual? No, she said, just nice. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. For a brief moment, the teasing vanished from her expression, revealing something softer underneath. Then Broma loudly smacked Lucas on the back hard enough to nearly launch him into the fire. Stew smells incredible. The moment was ruined instantly. Lucas coughed violently. Dear gods, your people are built like siege weapons. Thank you. That wasn't entirely a compliment. Broma grinned proudly anyway. A little later, the four sat around the fire eating from wooden bowls, while crickets chirped softly beyond the trees. And somehow, it already felt comfortable, like they'd known each other longer than a single evening. Lucas sat beside the fire while Seraphine stretched lazily across a nearby log, her tail swaying back and forth behind her. Broma devoured stew with terrifying efficiency. Lyra ate with the kind of elegance that made simple soup look aristocratic. Lucas looked between them. So what exactly are you three doing out here? The women exchanged glances. Traveling, Lyra said. Running from responsibility, Seraphine added cheerfully. Looking for work, Broma corrected. Lucas nodded slowly. Truthfully, he understood that feeling. The road was full of people searching for something. Purpose, freedom, adventure, or sometimes just a place where they finally felt they belonged. Lucas had never really found that place himself. He'd drifted from city to city for years now. Always moving, always leaving, always alone. His thoughts must have shown on his face, because Seraphine's expression softened slightly. What about you, wanderer? Lucas stared into the fire. I don't know. The crackling flames filled the silence for a moment. Then he shrugged with an embarrassed laugh. I guess I just never figured out where I fit. That earned him quieter reactions than expected. Broma's grin faded slightly. Lyra looked thoughtful. Seraphine watched him carefully now. You don't seem lonely, she said softly. Lucas smiled faintly. You can get used to almost anything. That sentence lingered in the air longer than he intended. Then, a loud rustling exploded from the bushes nearby. Everyone reacted instantly. Lyra's bow snapped into her hands. Broma grabbed a massive axe resting beside her pack. Seraphine's violet eyes flashed crimson as dark magic flickered around her fingers. Lucas, meanwhile, panicked and threw his bowl. The wooden bowl flew directly into the bushes with startling accuracy. A loud squawk followed. Then silence. Slowly, a very angry goose emerged from the underbrush. The entire camp froze. The goose stared at them with deep hatred. Lucas stared back. I can explain. The goose hissed like an ancient demon. Broma immediately lost control, laughing. Seraphine doubled over beside the log. Even Lyra turned away, trying and failing to hide her smile. The goose charged. "Oh, come on." Lucas barely dodged as the feathered menace attacked with murderous intent. "Why is it so fast?" "It has chosen you," Seraphine shouted between laughter. "You angered the forest spirit." "That is not a forest spirit." The goose bit his boot. Lucas yelped. Broma was now crying, laughing. Lyra had completely abandoned dignity and was openly smiling for the first time. And Seraphine was staring at Lucas with laughter in her glowing violet eyes and something warm blooming quietly beneath it. Because somehow, this hopelessly lost human had stumbled into their lives like a walking disaster wrapped in charm. And against all reason, it already felt dangerous to let him leave. The goose stayed with them for 3 days. No one knew why. Least of all Lucas. "It keeps following you," Lyra observed from atop a fallen tree trunk as the white-feathered menace waddled proudly behind Lucas like an angry little guardian spirit. Lucas looked exhausted. "I am aware. It bit you twice this morning." "Yes, and somehow stole your bread." "I know." Broma nearly fell over laughing again. Seraphine leaned casually against a tree, openly enjoying every second of Lucas's suffering. "You named it yet. I'm not numbing my attacker." The goose hissed at him. "You see, it understands hostility." "That sounds like fear talking," Seraphine said innocently. Lucas pointed dramatically. "Because it craves violence." The goose honked with unsettling intensity. Broma wiped tears from her eyes. "By the ancestors, this is the funniest thing I've seen in months." The morning journey continued through the dense Alarwin woods beneath shifting golden sunlight. Birds chirped overhead while the distant sound of rushing water echoed somewhere deeper in the forest. Lucas walked in front now, mostly because the goose refused to stop following him specifically. No one offered assistance. Traitors. Still, he found himself smiling more these days. It was strange how quickly companionship could settle into the heart. A few days ago, he'd been wandering alone through unfamiliar forests, wondering what direction his life was headed. Now every morning began with Broma arguing about breakfast portions, Lyra pretending not to enjoy conversations, and Seraphine finding increasingly creative excuses to stand close to him. Not that he minded. Actually, he minded very little, especially when Seraphine smiled at him, which she did often, sometimes while teasing him, sometimes while watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. Lucas noticed. He just didn't know what to do about it. By midday, dark clouds had gathered overhead. The forest dimmed. A cold wind swept through the trees. Lyra glanced upward immediately. Storm. Right on cue, thunder rolled across the sky. Broma groaned. "Oh, wonderful." Then the rain started. Not gentle rain. Not peaceful rain. No. The skis unleashed absolute fury. Within seconds, the group was drenched. Lucas pushed wet hair from his eyes, while Broma cursed loudly at the heavens themselves. "This is why mountains are superior." Seraphine laughed, while trying unsuccessfully to shield herself beneath her cloak. Lyra scanned the trees quickly. There, hidden between enormous roots, sat the crumbling remains of an old stone structure, overtaken by vines and moss. An abandoned shrine, perhaps, or an old watchpost. Either way, it had walls, which was currently perfect. The group hurried inside just as rain exploded across the forest in sheets. Thunder cracked overhead. Water dripped steadily through parts of the damaged roof, but the old ruin still offered decent shelter. Broma immediately began setting up camp again. Lyra checked the perimeter cautiously. Seraphine wrung water from her crimson hair, while Lucas tried to restart the fire with increasingly tragic results. "Why is wood so difficult?" "Because it's wet," Lyra replied. "That feels judgmental somehow." "It's factual." Lucas squinted suspiciously at the fire pit, while Seraphine crouched beside him. "Need help?" "I refuse to be defeated by sticks." "That bad, huh?" "I'm fighting for my dignity here." Seraphine smiled softly. "I think your dignity died when the goose chased you into a river yesterday." "I thought we agreed never to speak of that again." "No one agreed to that." Lucas sighed dramatically while she laughed beside him. Gods, her laugh was beautiful. Warm, rich, dangerously addictive. He looked away before his brain could embarrass him further. Eventually the fire caught. "Barely." Broma cheered loudly. "A miracle." "It was skill," Lucas argued weakly. "It was luck," Lyra corrected. "It was mostly Seraphine," Broma added. Lucas stared at the tiny fire proudly anyway. "I choose to remember myself as heroic." The storm outside intensified as evening approached. Rain hammered against ancient stone, while wind howled through cracks in the ruined structure. Inside, however, it felt warm. Safe. Broma had fallen asleep against her pack already, snoring softly. Lyra sat near the entrance, reading an old, weathered book from her belongings. And Lucas sat beside the fire, trying not to notice that Seraphine had moved very close to him. Very close. Close enough that their shoulders brushed occasionally. Not that he was hyper-aware of it or anything. Definitely not. "You're thinking too loudly," Seraphine murmured. Lucas blinked. "What?" "You get this expression when you overthink things." "I do not." "You absolutely do." Lucas opened his mouth to argue, then realized she was right, which was irritating. Seraphine watched him quietly in the firelight. Without the usual teasing, she looked softer tonight, more vulnerable somehow. The flames reflected gently across her violet eyes and curved horns. "You know," she said quietly, "most people get nervous around Demonkin." Lucas frowned slightly. "Why?" Seraphine gave him a look. "The horns usually answer that question." "That seems unfair." "It usually is." Lucas considered her for a moment, then shrugged. "You're nicer than most humans I've met." That surprised a laugh out of her. A dangerously low standard. But still accurate. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain continued outside. The fire crackled softly between them. Then Seraphine looked at him again. And this time, her voice lost almost all teasing. "You really don't care what I am?" Lucas met her eyes. "No." The answer came easily. "Honestly, completely." Something shifted in her expression at that. Something quieter, more fragile, like a wall lowering just slightly. Then thunder boomed overhead, and Lyra calmly announced from across the room, "Lucas is blushing." Lucas nearly died instantly. "I am not." "You absolutely are," Seraphine said with immediate delight. Broma woke up halfway through the chaos. "Who's blushing?" "No one," Lucas shouted. The goose honked judgmentally from the doorway. "Traitor." Seraphine laughed so hard she nearly fell into him. And despite his embarrassment, Lucas found himself laughing too. Because somehow this ridiculous journey already felt like the happiest accident of his life. By the time the storm finally passed, the group's supplies had become concerning. Specifically, they had half a loaf of bread, one questionable onion, a tiny amount of dried meat, and a goose that refused to contribute to society. "We need supplies," Lyra stated. "We could eat the goose," Lucas suggested hopefully. The goose hissed at him immediately. "See," Seraphine said, "it knows. That thing is possessed." Broma stretched her arms with a satisfied grunt. "There's a town nearby, if I remember correctly." Lucas brightened. "A real town?" "Yes." "With beds?" "Yes." "And actual food?" "Yes." Lucas nearly cried. "I could kiss you." Broma grinned. "Buy me ale first." Seraphine leaned closer to Lucas immediately. "I'm cheaper." Lyra made a sound of deep disappointment somewhere behind them. The town of Brindlewatch appeared around noon, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. It was small but lively. Stone roads wound between timber-framed buildings while colorful banners fluttered overhead. Merchants shouted from crowded stalls, children ran laughing through the streets, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air like divine intervention. Lucas stood frozen at the entrance. "Civilization. You say that like you've been stranded for years," Lyra noted. "You underestimate how traumatic that goose was." The goose bit his leg. "Ow." Broma nearly collapsed laughing again. Honestly, Lucas had started wondering if making the dwarf laugh was becoming his true purpose in life. The group entered town together, immediately attracting attention. Which made sense. A human, an elf, a dwarf, and a horned Demonkin traveling together wasn't exactly common. Neither was the goose, especially because it still followed Lucas specifically. A nearby child pointed excitedly. "Mama, why is that bird angry?" "Don't look directly at it, dear." "Wise woman." They split briefly to gather supplies. Broma went searching for ale. Lyra headed toward a herbalist shop. Seraphine disappeared into a clothing stall after declaring she needed something less muddy and more scandalous. Lucas wisely chose not to ask questions. That left him alone in the market with the goose, which somehow made him feel less safe. He wandered through the bustling streets, admiring the lively atmosphere around him. Musicians played near the central fountain, while merchants called out deals from decorated stalls. For the first time in a long while, Lucas felt light, relaxed, happy. Then disaster struck. "Well now," a voice sneered nearby, "that's an ugly creature." Lucas turned. A merchant stood near, a wagon of fabrics glaring directly at the goose. The goose glared back with murderous intensity. Lucas sensed danger immediately. "Sir," he said carefully, "I would recommend emotional de-escalation." The merchant scoffed. "It's just a bird." Lucas opened his mouth. Too late. The merchant waved a broom aggressively. The goose attacked like divine punishment incarnate. Chaos erupted instantly. "Get it off." Feathers exploded into the air as the goose launched itself at the screaming man. The merchant stumbled backward into his own stall, collapsing fabrics everywhere while terrified customers scattered. Lucas ran after them in horror. "Oh gods, not again." The goose climbed the man. No one understood how. One moment it was flapping. The next it was somehow on his shoulders committing crimes. "It's in my shirt." "That seems physically impossible." "Make it stop." People were openly cheering now. A bard had started playing music. Lucas reached for the goose and immediately got dragged into the catastrophe when the merchant grabbed him in panic. All three crashed into a barrel display. Apples exploded everywhere. The goose emerged victorious atop the wreckage like a tiny feathery conqueror. Silence fell across the market. Lucas lay flat on his back staring at the sky. "I miss peace." Then someone laughed. Not just laughed. Absolutely lost control laughing. Lucas lifted his head. Seraphine stood nearby carrying several shopping bags while doubled over in hysterics. Lyra had both hands over her face, trying and failing to maintain composure. Broma was openly wheezing. Even nearby townsfolk were laughing now. The merchant, meanwhile, pointed furiously at Lucas. "Control your demon bird." "It's not my bird." The goose honked proudly. A nearby old woman nodded solemnly. "It has chosen him." "That's not how animals work." Seraphine finally managed to breathe again. Then she looked at Lucas sitting in scattered apples, with feathers in his hair and tears of frustration in his eyes. And something in her expression softened completely. Because despite the chaos, despite the absurdity, Lucas never got angry, never cruel, never bitter. He just laughed eventually and kept going. It was rare, dangerously rare. She walked over and offered him a hand. Lucas looked up at her. For a brief moment, the noisy market faded away around them. "You all right, wanderer?" she asked softly. Lucas took her hand carefully. Emotionally, no. That earned a quiet laugh. She helped him to his feet, but neither let go immediately. And for one small heartbeat, the world felt oddly still between them. Then the goose bit Lucas again. "Son of a..." The moment shattered instantly. Broma nearly passed out laughing. Lyra actually smiled openly this time. And Seraphine laughed against Lucas's shoulder while he suffered dramatically beside her. Honestly, this might have been the best day he'd had in years. The group stayed in Brindlewatch for 2 nights, mostly because Broma discovered the local tavern served excellent ale, and partly because Lucas threatened mutiny if he had to sleep on the ground again immediately after surviving the market incident. The goose, unfortunately, remained with them. At this point, everyone had accepted it as a curse from higher powers. The tavern itself was warm and lively, filled with music, laughter, and the comforting smell of roasted meat. Travelers crowded long wooden tables while servers weaved expertly through the noise carrying overflowing mugs. Lucas sat between Broma and Seraphine, while Lyra occupied the seat across from them with the patience of someone enduring manageable chaos. Broma raised her mug proudly. To surviving another day with this fool. Lucas pointed at himself. "I cooked for you, and nearly got arrested by poultry. Those events feel unrelated." Seraphine leaned against the table with a sly smile. "I still think the goose loves you. It has attempted murder 6 times. Passionate relationships are complicated." Lyra sighed into her drink. "I miss silence." Lucas grinned. "You've smiled at least 3 times today." "That never happened." "It absolutely happened." "You lack evidence." Broma immediately betrayed her. "You snorted when he tripped over the bucket earlier." Lyra's eyes widened slightly. "You swore never to speak of that." "I was bribed with stew." Lucas laughed into his drink, while Lyra glared at him with absolutely no real anger behind it anymore. That was another thing he'd noticed. The elf had changed around them. Or maybe around him specifically. At first she'd watched him like he might secretly be an idiot. Now she watched him like she was reluctantly realizing she enjoyed his company. Which honestly felt like a victory. A dangerous one. But still a victory. As the evening continued, the tavern grew louder. A bard began playing near the fireplace, while travelers shared stories over drinks. Lucas listened quietly for a while, content simply sitting there with them. It had been so long since he'd had this. Not just company. Belonging. That strange warmth of sitting beside people who wanted you there. The thought settled heavily in his chest. "You're doing it again," Seraphine murmured beside him. Lucas blinked. "Doing what?" "Thinking too hard. I'm starting to dislike how easily you read me." She smiled softly. "I'm observant. You're nosy." "That too." Broma suddenly stood up. "I'll run." Lyra rose moments later. "I need fresh air before your people become louder somehow." "My people? You are all chaos." Lucas watched them leave with amusement. Then it was just him and Seraphine at the table. The noise of the tavern seemed strangely distant now. For once, neither of them spoke immediately. Seraphine slowly traced the rim of her mug with one finger, while the firelight reflected softly off her horns. Lucas glanced at her. "You okay?" She looked mildly surprised by the question. "Why wouldn't I be?" "You got quiet." Seraphine studied him for a moment before giving a small shrug. "Just thinking." "That sounds dangerous." "Very." Lucas smiled slightly. Then after a pause, he asked softly, "What were you thinking about?" For once, Seraphine hesitated. Not teasing, not flirting, actually hesitant. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and looked toward the tavern window, where moonlight spilled across the glass. "I'm not used to this." Lucas frowned slightly. The tavern. Being comfortable around people. That caught him off guard. Seraphine always seemed so confident, so effortless, like nothing could shake her. But now her voice sounded quieter, more honest. "Demonkin don't exactly make others relax," she continued lightly. "Most towns either fear us or blame us whenever something goes wrong." Lucas frowned. "That's stupid." "It's common." She said it casually, like she'd accepted it long ago. That somehow made it worse. Lucas looked at her carefully. "Well, they're wrong." Seraphine met his eyes then. Really met them. And the teasing smile she wore so often faded slightly around the edges. "You say things like that very easily." "Because it's true. You barely know me." Lucas shrugged. "You've been kind to me since we met. I've also mocked you relentlessly." "That too." A quiet laugh escaped her. Then silence settled again. Not awkward silence. Comfortable silence. The kind that only happened when two people genuinely enjoyed being near each other. Outside, rain began falling lightly against the tavern windows once more. Soft, peaceful. Lucas found himself watching the reflections of firelight dance across Seraphine's violet eyes. God, she was beautiful. Not just physically. There was something alive about her. Warm, wild, bright. And before his brain could stop him, he spoke. "You know, your eyes are really nice." The words landed. Seraphine blinked. Lucas blinked. Then realization struck him with catastrophic force. "Oh no." Seraphine stared at him. "You just said that out loud." "I did." "Yes." "That's unfortunate." A slow smile spread across her face. "Not teasing this time. Something softer. Something far more dangerous. I think your eyes are nice too, Lucas." His brain stopped functioning entirely. Somewhere in the background, Broma returned carrying drinks. She took one look at Lucas's expression and immediately smirked. "Oh, something happened." "Nothing happened," Lucas answered far too quickly. Seraphine hid a grin behind her mug. Lyra returned moments later, glanced between them once, and sighed with the exhaustion of someone witnessing inevitable disaster unfold in real time. You two are hopeless. Lucas nearly choked on air, and Seraphine laughed quietly beside him, while rain continued tapping softly against the tavern windows. Leaving Brindlewatch should have been simple. It was not, mostly because the goose stole an entire sausage from a butcher stand and triggered a chase through half the town. Lucas was blamed immediately. "This is discrimination," he complained while running. "You're the chosen one," Seraphine replied between laughs. "I never accepted this responsibility." Broma was laughing too hard to help. Even Lyra looked dangerously close to smiling as the furious butcher shouted behind them. Eventually they escaped the town alive, though Lucas was fairly certain they were no longer welcome there. The goose marched proudly beside him, carrying stolen sausage like a war trophy. "I hope you know," Lucas muttered to the bird, "one day I'm leaving you somewhere." The goose honked confidently. Seraphine patted Lucas sympathetically on the shoulder. "It knows you won't." The annoying part was, she was probably right. The road north wound through rolling hills and ancient forests painted gold beneath the afternoon sun. Wildflowers swayed in the breeze, while distant mountains loomed along the horizon like sleeping giants. It was peaceful, comfortably so. Lucas walked near the front of the group now, occasionally exchanging quiet conversation with Lyra, while Broma and Seraphine argued behind them about whether dragons could technically be considered scaled cats. "They nap constantly," Seraphine argued. "They also breathe fire," Broma countered. "So do some cats." "That is not helping your argument." Lucas smiled faintly as their voices drifted behind him. Then he glanced toward Lyra. "You're quieter today." The elf adjusted the strap of her bow. "I usually am." "True, but this is extra quiet." Lyra gave him a sideways look. "You notice a great deal." Lucas shrugged. "I pay attention." That answer seemed to linger with her for a moment. The wind stirred gently through the trees around them. Then unexpectedly, Lyra spoke again. "You've changed the group dynamic." Lucas blinked. "Good change or bad change?" "That remains under evaluation." "That sounds threatening." "It should." Lucas laughed softly, but Lyra's expression remained thoughtful. "Before you arrived," she admitted quietly, "we traveled well together, but—" She searched briefly for words. "There was distance." Lucas listened carefully. Broma hides loneliness with noise. Seraphine hides it with humor. Lyra glanced ahead along the road, and I simply avoid it altogether. That surprised him, mostly because she sounded so aware of it. "So what changed?" he asked gently. Lyra looked at him then. Directly, "You arrived." Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it again, because somehow that simple answer hit harder than expected. Before he could respond, Broma suddenly shouted from behind them. "Lucas, important question." He turned. "Yes." "If a dragon laid eggs in your house, how long before you accepted ownership?" Lucas stared at her. "What?" Seraphine pointed triumphantly. "See, that hesitation means he understands." "You two are insane." "Correct," Lyra muttered. The conversation dissolved into chaos shortly afterward. And honestly, Lucas loved every second of it. They stopped near sunset beside a small lake surrounded by silver-leaf trees. The water reflected the evening sky in shades of orange and violet, while fireflies drifted lazily through the air. It was beautiful enough to feel unreal. Broma immediately began setting camp. Lyra gathered firewood. Seraphine disappeared briefly into the trees, claiming she wanted 5 minutes away from all of you. Lucas volunteered to fetch water from the lake. Truthfully, He just needed a quiet moment. Not because he disliked the group. Quite the opposite. That was the problem. These feelings growing inside him were becoming difficult to ignore. He liked them. All of them. Broma's warmth. Lyra's quiet intelligence. Seraphine's playful charm hiding surprising tenderness underneath. And that terrified him a little. Because Luca's ravens had spent years drifting through life without roots. Without permanence. People eventually left. Or he did. That was simply how things worked. So why did this already feel different? He crouched beside the lake with a quiet sigh. The water reflected the first stars overhead. Then footsteps approached behind him. Lucas didn't need to turn around. Seraphine. Am I that obvious? A little. She sat beside him near the water's edge, knees pulled loosely against her chest, while moonlight shimmered softly across her crimson hair. For once, neither joked immediately. Seraphine looked out across the lake. You disappeared. Lucas shrugged lightly. Just thinking. There it is again. He smiled faintly. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Lucas hesitated. Then finally, why did you invite me to stay with you all? Seraphine looked genuinely surprised. You really don't know. I assumed poor judgment. That earned a quiet laugh. Then she looked back toward the lake again. At first, she admitted, because you were funny. Lucas nodded solemnly. A devastating curse. But then she paused softly. You kept being kind. He blinked slightly. Seraphine continued quietly. You didn't treat any of us differently. No fear, no arrogance, no trying to impress anyone. A small smile touched her lips. You just cared naturally. Lucas looked down at the water. I don't think that's anything special. Seraphine turned toward him fully then. It is. The sincerity in her voice hit him harder than any flirtation ever had. The night air suddenly felt very still. Very close. Lucas met her violet eyes. And for a moment, neither looked away. Then, a loud splash exploded behind them. Both jumped. Broma emerged waist-deep from the lake, holding a fish triumphantly above her head. I have one. Lucas nearly fell backward in shock. Where did you even come from? The water. That does not answer the question. Lyra stood at the shoreline, rubbing her temples. I told her not to wrestle the fish. The fish challenged me. Seraphine completely lost control, laughing. Lucas buried his face in his hands. And somehow, despite the ruined moment, despite the absurdity, the warmth between them remained, quietly growing beneath every laugh. 2 days later, the group arrived in the riverside city of Avalmere and immediately regretted their timing. The streets were packed. Colorful banners hung from rooftops. Musicians played on nearly every corner, and crowds filled the city with enough noise to rival an active battlefield. Lucas blinked slowly at the chaos around them. What happened here? A passing merchant grinned. Harvest festival. Broma's eyes lit up instantly. Oh no. Lyra sighed softly. That expression means trouble. Seraphine looked equally delighted. I love festivals. Of course you do, Lyra muttered. Lucas barely had time to react before Broma grabbed his arm and dragged him into the crowd. The next several hours became a blur of absolute madness. At some point, Broma won an arm wrestling contest against 3 men simultaneously. Seraphine somehow talked a pastry vendor into giving her free sweets for being charming. Lyra accidentally became the target of several very enthusiastic children who thought she was a princess. and Lucas lost 15 silver coins trying to beat a rigged ring toss game. I was robbed. You missed the bottle entirely, Lyra replied. The wind cheated. There was no wind. The bottle moved. It did not. It looked guilty. Seraphine laughed beside him while eating stolen or possibly legally acquired festival pastries. Honestly, Lucas wasn't sure anymore. As evening settled across Avalmir, lanterns began illuminating the streets in warm gold and amber light. Music drifted through the city while dancers filled the central square beneath strings of glowing paper lanterns. It was beautiful. Alive. Warm. Lucas found himself smiling constantly without realizing it. And every time he looked beside him, one of them was there. Broma loudly haggling with a merchant. Lyra quietly observing the crowd. Seraphine teasing him with that dangerous smile of hers. Somehow they already felt like part of his life. That realization was becoming harder to ignore. You're starring again, Seraphine whispered near his ear. Lucas nearly jumped. I was. You absolutely were. I was appreciating the atmosphere. MMHM. Her tail flicked lazily behind her while she watched him with open amusement. Then suddenly, music swelled through the square nearby. Couples began gathering for dancing. Lucas glanced toward the crowd instinctively, then immediately regretted it when Seraphine noticed. Oh, no, oh, that tone concerns me. You want to dance? I absolutely do not. You absolutely do. Lucas crossed his arms defensively. I dance like an injured horse. That sounds entertaining. Before he could protest further, Broma appeared behind him and shoved him forward. Go. Lucas stumbled. What? Dance with her. I did not agree to this plan. Lyra looked suspiciously amused now too. Your suffering may be educational. Lucas stared at all three women in betrayal. I thought we were friends. We are, Seraphine replied sweetly while taking his hand, which makes this funnier. Lucas barely had time to process events before she pulled him into the edge of the dancing crowd. Warm lantern light illuminated the square while music echoed around them. Lucas looked horrified. Seraphine looked delighted. I should warn you, he said seriously, there is real danger here. You're that bad. I once stepped on my own foot. How? I panicked. That earned another laugh from her. Gods, he loved hearing that laugh. The dance itself was simple enough. Mostly slow turns and small movements. Still, Lucas remained deeply suspicious of the entire experience. Seraphine guided him easily through the crowd, while the lanterns above painted soft gold across her crimson hair and curved horns. And somewhere along the way, Lucas stopped feeling embarrassed, because she was smiling at him. Not teasing, not laughing, just smiling warmly enough to make the rest of the world blur around the edges. You're doing fine, she murmured. That makes one of us. You trust me too easily. Lucas looked at her quietly for a moment, then answered honestly. I think I do. That changed something in her expression instantly. A softness, a vulnerability, small but real. The music slowed slightly around them while couples swayed beneath the glowing lanterns. And for one dangerous heartbeat, Lucas thought she might kiss him. Then chaos returned. Naturally, Broma came charging through the crowd, carrying enough festival food to feed an army. Lucas' emergency. He blinked. What kind of emergency? The meat skewers are incredible. That is not an emergency. It absolutely is. Lyra arrived moments later, looking exhausted. There are children following me again. 3 small girls immediately appeared behind her wearing flower crowns. Pretty elf lady. Lyra closed her eyes briefly like someone enduring divine punishment. Seraphine laughed against Lucas's shoulder while he failed miserably not to smile. And suddenly, the moment didn't feel ruined at all. Because standing there beneath glowing lanterns, surrounded by laughter and noise and ridiculousness, Lucas realized something terrifying. He didn't want this journey to end. Not anymore. Not if it meant losing this. Losing them. The thought settled heavily and warmly in his chest. Then the goose appeared out of nowhere, carrying an entire loaf of bread, nearly bigger than itself. Lucas stared in disbelief. Where did it even get that? The goose honked proudly. A distant baker screamed. Broma pointed immediately. Run! And seconds later, all 4 of them were sprinting through the lantern-lit streets, laughing like complete idiots, while angry shouting echoed somewhere behind them. Honestly, Lucas had never felt more alive. The road leaving Avomere followed the river northward through rolling green hills and scattered forests touched by early autumn colors. For the first time in days, things were quiet. Not awkward quiet. Comfortable quiet. The kind shared between people who no longer felt the need to fill every silence. Broma walked ahead humming to herself while carrying enough festival snacks to sustain a small kingdom. Lyra read while walking somehow, which Lucas remained convinced was witchcraft. And Seraphine strolled beside him beneath the afternoon sun, occasionally bumping her shoulder lightly against his for no reason other than she could. The goose waddled nearby like an armed escort. Lucas had stopped questioning reality. You're smiling again, Seraphine observed. Lucas glanced at her. I do that around you people. You people. You disasters. Broma shouted from ahead without turning around. I heard that. Good. Lyra flipped a page calmly. Technically accurate. Seraphine looked deeply offended. I am elegance incarnate. You stole pastries using flirtation. And it worked beautifully. Lucas laughed softly. Gods, he really was happy. The realization struck him more often lately. Not temporary happiness. Not distraction. Real happiness. And that scared him more than he wanted to admit. Because happiness meant attachment. Attachment meant loss eventually. That was how life worked. Still, when Seraphine smiled at him, it became very difficult to care about caution. They reached a small hillside overlook near sunset, where the river below reflected streaks of gold and crimson beneath the evening sky. Broma immediately dropped her pack. Camp here. Lyra nodded once. Agreed. Lucas moved automatically to help gather firewood, while Seraphine unpacked supplies nearby. Everything felt natural now. Effortless. Like they'd traveled together far longer than a few weeks. At some point during setup, Lucas noticed Lyra sitting alone near the edge of the hill, quietly watching the sunset. He hesitated briefly, then walked over. Mind if I sit? Lyra glanced up at him. You're going to anyway. Probably. That earned the faintest hint of a smile. Lucas sat beside her, overlooking the river valley below. The wind moved softly through the tall grass around them, while distant birds drifted across the glowing sky. For a while neither spoke. Then Lyra surprised him. You've changed, Seraphine. Lucas blinked. What? She laughs more now. He glanced back toward camp instinctively. Seraphine was currently trying and failing to stop Broma from feeding the goose dried fruit. Lucas smiled faintly. She was already pretty amazing. Lyra looked at him quietly for a moment. You really mean things when you say them. The observation caught him off guard slightly. I try to. Most people don't. Lucas didn't know how to answer that. The wind shifted gently between them. Then Lyra spoke again, more softly this time. You've changed all of us, I think. That hit harder than expected. Lucas looked down toward the river below. I'm not anything special. Lyra immediately answered. You should stop saying that. He looked back at her, surprised by the firmness in her voice. The elf rarely spoke emotionally, which meant when she did, she meant it. Before Lucas could respond, a loud yell erupted from camp. They both turned. Broma was running. The goose was chasing her. Seraphine was laughing so hard she could barely stand. What happened? Lucas asked carefully. Lyra watched the chaos with complete resignation. Broma attempted diplomacy. With the goose? Yes. How did that fail? The usual way. Lucas stood laughing softly while the dwarf sprinted uphill, yelling something about betrayal and feathers. And suddenly, without warning, Lyra laughed too. Not polite amusement, not restrained elegance, an actual genuine laugh. Bright, warm, beautiful. Lucas stared at her in mild shock. Lyra immediately realized what happened and looked away. You saw nothing. That was adorable. I will push you off this hill. That seems aggressive after character growth. Lyra sighed deeply into the sunset, while Lucas continued grinning beside her. Back near camp, night settled fully over the hills as stars slowly filled the sky overhead. The fire crackled warmly, while the group settled down for the evening. Broma eventually fell asleep first as usual. The goose slept beside her pack like a tiny, feathery guard demon. Lyra retired shortly afterward, though not before quietly handing Lucas a folded blanket because, according to her, humans are biologically fragile. Lucas accepted this insult gratefully. That left him alone beside the fire with Seraphine once again, which was becoming increasingly dangerous for his emotional stability. She sat close beside him beneath the starlight, close enough that their knees brushed occasionally. Neither moved away. The fire illuminated soft gold across her face, while the distant river shimmered below the hillside. You've been quieter today, she murmured. Lucas stared into the flames. Just thinking. There it is again. He smiled weakly. Sorry. Don't apologize. Seraphine leaned slightly against his shoulder. I like hearing what's in your head. Lucas swallowed softly. God, she had no idea what she did to him sometimes. For a while, they simply sat there together beneath the stars. Then quietly, almost nervously, Lucas spoke. Can I ask you something? You can ask me anything. He hesitated. Then finally, what happens after this? Seraphine looked at him carefully. The journey. Yeah. The question lingered heavily between them, because they both understood what he really meant. Eventually, roads split. People left. Life moved on. Seraphine looked back toward the stars overhead. I don't know, she admitted softly. Lucas nodded slowly. Some part of him had expected that answer. Still, it hurt more than expected. Then suddenly, Seraphine reached over and took his hand. Just gently, warm fingers threading through his. Lucas looked at her immediately. And this time, there was almost no teasing left in her expression at all. Hey, she said quietly. You found us by accident. The fire crackled softly between them. Seraphine squeezed his hand lightly. Maybe don't start deciding how it ends yet. Lucas stared at her, at the warmth in her eyes, at the softness in her voice, at the way holding her hand already felt strangely natural. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. The next morning began with screaming. Not dangerous screaming, offended screaming. Lucas opened his eyes just in time to see Broma sprint past the campsite wearing only one boot, while the goose chased her through the grass, carrying the other triumphantly in its beak. That monster stole my footwear. The goose honked victoriously. Lyra sat beside the fire sipping tea with complete emotional detachment. Nature is healing. You are enjoying this far too much, Broma accused. Correct. Nearby, Seraphine was laughing into Lucas's shoulder, while he struggled to breathe properly from exhaustion and amusement. Honestly, this had become their normal somehow. And Lucas loved it. After breakfast, the group resumed traveling north along the river roads toward the larger trade regions beyond the hills. The weather remained beautiful. Clear skies, cool wind, golden sunlight filtering across endless autumn fields. The kind of peaceful day that made people slow down without realizing it. Lucas walked near the back of the group, this time beside Seraphine, while Broma and Lyra argued ahead about whether soup technically counted as a beverage. It's consumed from a cup, Broma insisted. That does not make it a drink. You can sip it. You can also sip melted cheese. That proves nothing. Lucas smiled faintly. Then Seraphine nudged him lightly. You're doing it again. What? That look. What look? The one where you stare at us like you accidentally found happiness and still don't trust it. Lucas nearly tripped over nothing. That's weirdly specific. I'm observant. You're terrifying. A little. Her tail brushed lightly against his hand as they walked. Not accidental. Definitely not accidental. Lucas tried very hard not to think about it too much. He failed. Spectacularly. By late afternoon, they reached an old stone bridge crossing a wide river gorge. The view was breathtaking. Water roared far below, while cliffs rose high on either side covered in crimson and gold trees. Broma leaned against the bridge railing. Now this is a view. Lyra nodded quietly. It's beautiful. Seraphine looked toward Lucas. You're thinking again. I do other things occasionally. Rarely. Lucas smiled softly before resting his arms against the stone railing beside her. The wind tugged gently at their clothes while sunlight shimmered across the river below. Then unexpectedly, Seraphine grew quieter. Lucas noticed immediately. What is it? She stared out across the gorge for a long moment before answering. Can I tell you something stupid? You've seen my life. I'm hardly qualified to judge. That earned a small laugh. Then she exhaled softly. When I was younger, her voice lowered slightly, I used to think I'd always travel alone. Lucas looked at her carefully but stayed quiet. Seraphine continued slowly. Most people saw the horns first, then made decisions about me afterward. She smiled faintly, though sadness lingered underneath it. Eventually, you stopped trying very hard. Lucas frowned slightly. That's their failure, not yours. You really believe that, don't you? Yes. The answer came instantly. Without hesitation. Seraphine stared at him after that. Really stared. Like she still couldn't fully understand how genuine he was. And honestly, Lucas didn't fully understand it himself. He just knew how he felt when he looked at her. Warm, safe, alive. Then quietly, Almost teasing to hide the vulnerability underneath, Seraphine asked, "So what did you think when you first saw me?" Lucas blinked. "Oh." She smirked slightly. "Oh. Well," Lucas rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "At first I was trying very hard not to stare." Seraphine's smile widened instantly. "Lucas ravens. You asked. You were staring at my horns." "Not exclusively." That got him a full laugh. Bright and genuine. Gods, he'd do almost anything to keep hearing that sound. Then Seraphine stepped closer beside him. Close enough that he could feel her warmth, even in the cool wind. "And now," she asked softly. Lucas looked at her. At the violet eyes. The crimson hair dancing gently in the breeze. The teasing smile slowly fading into something quieter. More vulnerable. And this time, he answered honestly, "Now I think you're the most beautiful woman I've ever met." Silence. Complete silence. Even the wind seemed quieter somehow. Seraphine stared at him in genuine surprise. Lucas immediately realized what he'd said. "Oh gods." A faint blush spread across Seraphine's cheeks. Lucas had never seen that before. And somehow it made her even more breathtaking. "You really just say things like that," she murmured. "I didn't mean to say it out loud." "I'm glad you did." The world narrowed slightly in that moment. The bridge, the river, the distant trees, all of it faded quietly into the background. Because Seraphine was looking at him, now with an expression he'd never seen before. Not teasing, not playful, just honest. And Lucas thought, maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment. Then Broma's voice shattered reality completely. "Lucas." He jumped violently. "What?" The dwarf pointed toward the road behind them. The goose stole a traveler's hat. Sure enough, the feathered menace was sprinting triumphantly down the bridge, wearing a very expensive-looking hat somehow balanced around its neck. A nobleman chased after it in absolute fury. "That bird is cursed." Lucas buried his face in his hands. "I can't have one romantic moment in my life." Seraphine laughed, so hard she had to lean against him for support. Lyra pinched the bridge of her nose. And moments later, all four of them were once again chasing an outlaw goose across a bridge, while apologizing profusely to screaming merchants and confused travelers. Honestly, at this point it felt perfect. 3 weeks later, the journey finally brought them to the cliffs of Northreach. The city rose high above the sea like something from a painting. White stone towers overlooked crashing waves, while massive bridges connected layered districts carved directly into the cliffsides. Ships drifted through the harbor below beneath banners snapping proudly in the ocean wind. Lucas stared up at it quietly. "That's a lot of stairs." Broma groaned immediately. "Oh no." Lyra sighed softly. "He's right." Seraphine laughed beside him, while the sea breeze moved through her crimson hair. After weeks on the road together, the four of them had settled into something easy. Something natural. Morning conversations. Shared meals. Quiet nights by the fire. Little touches that lingered longer now. Lingering glances that everyone noticed and no one commented on anymore. Even Lyra. Mostly. The only constant remained the goose, which was currently asleep inside Broma's backpack for reasons no one understood. They entered Northreach near sunset as golden light spilled across the city streets. Musicians played near the harbor. Merchants shouted from crowded markets. The smell of fresh bread and sea salt drifted through the evening air. It should have felt exciting. Instead, Lucas felt strangely heavy. Because for the first time since this journey began, they had nowhere specific left to go. No next destination. No road ahead demanding they keep moving. The realization sat heavily in his chest all evening. They rented rooms at a large harbor inn overlooking the sea. Later, after dinner, the others slowly drifted off one by one. Broma disappeared first after declaring she intended to fight a mattress honorably. Lyra retired shortly afterward with a quiet goodnight. Even the Goose vanished somewhere suspicious. That left Lucas alone outside on the inn's balcony, overlooking the ocean below. Moonlight shimmered across dark waves, while distant ships drifted like lanterns across the horizon. The wind smelled like rain and salt, and Lucas felt lost again. Not because he lacked direction, because now he finally had something worth losing. Footsteps approached quietly behind him. He smiled faintly without turning. "Seraphine, you're getting good at that." She stepped beside him along the balcony railing, violet eyes reflecting moonlight beneath the night sky. For a while neither spoke. The ocean filled the silence instead. Then Seraphine leaned lightly against the railing. "You've been quiet all evening." Lucas exhaled slowly. "Yeah. You want to tell me why?" He laughed weakly. "Because I think I'm about to ruin my own life." That got her attention immediately. Seraphine turned toward him fully. "Lucas, I mean it." He rubbed tiredly at his face before continuing. "Before I met you all, I was fine drifting around. No plans, no attachments, no expectations." He stared out at the ocean. "Then somehow I met 3 unbelievable women in the middle of a forest because I got lost like an idiot." Seraphine smiled softly. "A historically important event." Lucas laughed quietly. But now his voice lowered. "Now I can't imagine leaving." The words hung heavily between them. "Honest. Raw. Real." The sea wind moved softly around them. Then Seraphine asked the question quietly. "So don't." Lucas looked at her immediately. She met his eyes steadily. And for once, there was no teasing left at all. "You think I haven't noticed?" she asked softly. "The way you look at us, the way you care about everyone around you." A small smile touched her lips. "Lucas, you became part of our lives almost immediately." He swallowed hard. Seraphine stepped closer. "So stop acting like you're temporary." That sentence broke something open inside him. All those years wandering, leaving, never staying long enough to matter anywhere. And somehow these women had walked into his life and quietly made space for him without asking for anything in return. Lucas laughed softly under his breath. "I really did get lost professionally." Seraphine smiled. "The best thing that ever happened to us." "God's." His chest hurt. Because she meant it. He could hear it. Lucas looked at her for a long moment beneath the moonlight. Then finally, carefully, he reached up and brushed a strand of crimson hair behind her ear. Seraphine's breath caught slightly. "You're incredible," he whispered. Her violet eyes softened instantly. And this time, neither of them looked away. The kiss happened slowly, naturally, like something that had been waiting for weeks beneath every laugh, every glance, every quiet moment beside the fire. Warm hands, soft breath, moonlight over the sea. Lucas felt Seraphine's fingers curl gently against his shirt as she kissed him back with surprising tenderness beneath all her usual confidence. And when they finally separated, both of them were smiling, a little breathless, a little stunned. "Well," Seraphine murmured softly. Lucas blinked. "Yeah, that took longer than expected." He laughed helplessly. "You're very distracting." I know. A slow grin spread across her face again. There's something else you should know. Lucas narrowed his eyes suspiciously. That tone concerns me. Seraphine tilted her head toward the balcony doorway behind them. Lucas turned. Broma stood there holding 2 mugs of ale. Lyra stood beside her with complete emotional exhaustion. Both were very obviously watching. How long have you been there? Lucas asked carefully. Broma grinned. Long enough. We tried to leave, Lyra said flatly. Broma refused. It was romantic. You were taking bets. I won those bets. Lucas covered his face with both hands, while Seraphine laughed against his shoulder again. Then, unexpectedly, Lyra stepped forward, quietly, calmly, and wrapped her arms briefly around Lucas. The gesture surprised him enough that he froze entirely. You belong with us too, she said softly before stepping back. Lucas stared at her speechless. Broma immediately ruined the emotional moment by crushing him in a hug hard enough to crack his spine. Welcome to the family, lad. I think several organs shifted. Means it worked. Seraphine was still laughing quietly beside him, while moonlight shimmered across the balcony. And standing there between all of them, Lucas finally understood something. Home was never a place. It was people. People who laughed with you, stayed beside you, chose you, even when life was messy and ridiculous and full of outlaw geese. Especially then. And somewhere down in the streets of Northreach, a familiar goose stole an entire fish from a market stall, while distant screaming echoed into the night. Lucas closed his eyes briefly. It followed us. Yes, all 3 women answered together. Honestly, he wouldn't have changed a thing.